A quiet Washington night turned into a nightmare when Marcus Johnson, a presidential aide, was stopped by police. They saw a black man in a suit, nothing more. Little did they know, the man they brutalized wasn't just walking home, he was walking toward justice that would shake their world. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more powerful tales like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. The streetlights cast long shadows over the quiet Washington, D.C. street as Marcus Johnson adjusted his tie and clutched his briefcase. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the distant hum of city life faded into the background. The president's trusted aide was finally heading home after an intense day of meetings at the White House. He replayed the day's events in his mind. Policy discussions, drafting key strategies, and the president's personal encouragement about Marcus's ideas for police reform. His footsteps echoed off the stone sidewalks. Marcus often used these evening walks to decompress, a rare moment of solitude in his otherwise hectic life. Tonight, his mind buzzed with optimism. He had just proposed a bold initiative to overhaul police training programs nationwide, a project the president was eager to champion. Marcus knew the road ahead would be tough, but for once he felt hopeful. As he crossed into a quieter residential area, his optimism was abruptly interrupted. A police cruiser, parked under the shadow of a large oak tree, flicked on its lights. A sudden burst of red and blue cut through the dark, bathing the street in an ominous glow. "Hey, you!" barked a voice over the loudspeaker. Marcus instinctively froze. He turned to see two officers stepping out of the car. Both were white, mid-40s, and wearing expressions that made it clear this was no casual stop. "Can we help you, sir?" Marcus said politely, his voice calm despite the tightening knot in his stomach. "Help us?" One officer, whose badge read Tyler, sneered. "You tell me. What are you doing in this neighborhood at this hour?" Marcus frowned. "I'm walking home. Is there a problem?" The second officer, Grayson, circled him like a predator sizing up its prey. "Funny," Grayson said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "People like you don't usually walk around here without a reason." Marcus held his ground, gripping his briefcase tighter. He knew what they meant by people like you. He'd encountered this prejudice before. Despite his tailored suit, his polished demeanor, and his position in one of the most powerful offices in the world, they didn't see Marcus Johnson. They only saw a black man. "I work at the White House," Marcus replied, his voice steady but firm. "I've had a long day and I'm heading home." The officers exchanged a glance. Tyler smirked. "The White House, huh? You got a badge to prove that?" "I don't need to prove anything," Marcus said. "I haven't done anything wrong." That response seemed to be the spark Tyler needed to escalate. He stepped closer, his hand resting on the holster of his taser. "You think you're smart, don't you? Let me see some ID." Marcus took a deep breath, knowing this could escalate quickly. He reached into his pocket and produced his government-issued ID. Tyler snatched it and examined it under his flashlight. "Marcus Johnson," Tyler read aloud, mockery lacing his voice. "And you're, what, an intern? You're a little too old for that, aren't you?" "I'm a senior aide to the president," Marcus said evenly. "And I'm asking again, am I being detained?" Grayson laughed. "You've got some nerve, huh? Acting like you're untouchable." Before Marcus could respond, Tyler shoved the ID back at him. "You're being detained for suspicious behavior. Hands on the car." "What?" Marcus stepped back in disbelief. "I haven't done anything wrong." Tyler's smirk vanished, replaced with a hard, threatening glare. "I said, hands on the car, now." Marcus knew the protocol. Any resistance, no matter how justified, could be used against him. Slowly, he placed his hands on the hood of the police car, his heart pounding. Grayson approached and roughly patted him down, finding nothing but his phone and a few papers. "This is ridiculous," Marcus muttered. "You're harassing me for walking while black." Grayson slammed Marcus's briefcase onto the ground, scattering its contents across the pavement. "Watch your mouth," he hissed, "or we'll give you something real to complain about." Tyler grabbed Marcus's arm, yanking it behind his back. "Resisting, huh? You've just made it worse for yourself." "I'm not resisting," Marcus shouted, his voice strained as pain shot through his shoulder. "Let me go!" But the officers weren't listening. They dragged him to the ground, his cheek pressing against the cold asphalt. Tyler pressed his knee into Marcus's back, pinning him with unnecessary force. Grayson stood over him, his baton drawn. "Shut up and stay down," Tyler barked, his voice echoing in the empty street. Marcus gasped for breath, his mind racing. How had this escalated so quickly? He thought of his family, his colleagues, the president himself, all the people who'd vouch for him if only these officers would listen. But in this moment, none of that mattered. To Tyler and Grayson, Marcus was just another black man who didn't belong. From the corner of his eye, Marcus noticed a few bystanders gathering, their phones pointed at the scene. Someone shouted, "Leave him alone!" but the officers ignored them. Marcus's pulse quickened. He had to stay calm. He had to survive this. The sound of screeching tires broke through the chaos. A sleek black SUV came to a sharp stop a few feet away. The doors flew open, and two men in suits stepped out, their movements swift and purposeful. "Stop right there," one of them shouted. His voice was sharp and commanding, carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Tyler and Grayson froze, their hands still on Marcus. Grayson looked up, his face paling as he recognized the men, Secret Service agents. "What the hell are you doing to him?" the agent demanded, his hand resting on his holster. "Do you even know who this man is?" Marcus could see the shift in Tyler's demeanor, confidence melting into panic. Grayson stammered, "We were just—" He was acting suspicious. The agent cut him off. "This man is Marcus Johnson. He's an aide to the President of the United States. You've just assaulted one of the most trusted members of his staff." Tyler's grip loosened as the realization set in. Grayson took a step back, his baton falling to his side. Marcus, still on the ground, took a shaky breath as the agent crouched beside him, helping him to his feet. "You're safe now," the agent said softly, his eyes full of concern. "We've got this." Marcus stood, his legs unsteady, but his resolve firm. The bystanders continued to film, their voices growing louder with anger and disbelief. Tyler and Grayson were frozen in place, their faces a mix of fear and regret. Marcus dusted himself off, his voice calm but firm as he said, "You'll regret this." As the agents escorted him to the SUV, Marcus glanced back at the officers. For the first time that night, he saw fear in their eyes. Not fear of him, but of the consequences that awaited them. The sleek black SUV sped through the streets of Washington, D.C., its engine humming with urgency. Marcus sat in the back seat, his body still trembling from the encounter. One of the Secret Service agents, Agent Brooks, handed him a bottle of water. "Drink this," Brooks said gently, his eyes flicking to Marcus in the rearview mirror. "You're safe now." Marcus hesitated, then took a small sip, the cool liquid soothing his dry throat. His mind, however, was anything but calm. The adrenaline from the attack still coursed through his veins, and every time he closed his eyes he could feel the weight of Officer Tyler's knee on his back, the bite of cold asphalt against his cheek. Have they been taken into custody yet? Marcus asked, his voice low but steady. Not yet, Brooks replied, but they will be. We've already alerted the president, and he's furious. You'll be debriefed once we reach the White House. The words hit Marcus like a jolt. The president knew. For most, that might bring relief, but for Marcus, it added another layer of pressure. This wasn't just about him anymore. This incident would ripple outward, affecting not only his career, but the administration's agenda and the ongoing fight for justice he had dedicated his life to. The SUV pulled into a secured entrance, bypassing the throng of reporters already gathering outside. Word had spread quickly, thanks to bystanders uploading videos of the incident. The footage had gone viral within minutes, sparking outrage across social media. Marcus stepped out of the vehicle, his legs still shaky. Brooks and the other agent flanked him as they walked briskly through the halls of power. Staff members paused, their eyes widening at the sight of Marcus, his suit rumpled and his face marked with faint bruises. He was ushered into a private conference room where a small group waited. The president stood at the head of the table, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. A few senior advisors, including the chief of staff, exchanged grim looks as Marcus entered. "Marcus," the president said, stepping forward, "are you all right?" "I'm fine, sir," Marcus replied, though his voice betrayed his weariness. "Thank you." The president placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "What happened to you tonight is unacceptable. It's exactly why we need to push harder for reform." Marcus nodded but stayed silent. He didn't want to speak yet, not until he had gathered his thoughts. He sat down as the chief of staff handed him a tablet showing the viral footage. Marcus hesitated before pressing play. The video was even worse than he had imagined. The shaky camera captured every detail: the officers' mockery, their unwarranted aggression, and the brutal takedown. He winced as he watched himself being slammed to the ground, the sounds of the bystanders' outrage ringing in his ears. "It's already making headlines," the chief of staff said grimly, "and we have reporters outside demanding a statement." "We're not saying anything until we've reviewed everything," the president interjected, his tone sharp. "This isn't just about optics. This is about accountability." Marcus looked up. "Sir, I appreciate that, but this isn't just about me. This is about every person who doesn't have Secret Service agents to show up and save them. We need to make sure those officers and the system that protects them are held accountable." The room fell silent. Marcus's words hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the weight of the moment. Hours later, Marcus sat in a private medical bay within the White House, being examined by a doctor. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages, colleagues, friends, and even strangers offering their support. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the sound of the doctor's voice. "You're lucky nothing's broken," the doctor said, examining a bruise on his cheekbone. "But you need rest. Trauma like this isn't just physical." Marcus nodded absent-mindedly, his thoughts elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Tyler and Grayson. What were they doing now? Were they feeling any remorse, or were they scrambling to cover their tracks? His question was answered later that evening when Brooks returned with an update. "They're claiming you resisted arrest," Brooks said, his jaw tight. "But the bystanders' footage directly contradicts their report. They also filed a charge sheet with several fabricated details." Marcus clenched his fists. "And the department?" "Backing them," Brooks replied. "At least for now. But we've got forensic experts analyzing the footage, and the discrepancies will expose their lies." Meanwhile, in a dimly lit office at the precinct, Tyler and Grayson sat across from their captain, a stern woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. She slammed a printed copy of the video onto the desk. "What the hell were you two thinking?" she demanded, her voice low but seething. "Do you have any idea who that man was?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We didn't know. He looked out of place. He could have been a threat." "A threat?" the captain snapped. "To what? Your fragile egos? He's a senior aide to the president. Do you understand the kind of trouble you've brought on this department?" Grayson leaned forward, his voice desperate. "We can fix this. We'll say he was acting aggressive. He pushed back." "Stop." The captain held up her hand. "Do you think the public is going to believe that after seeing this?" She pointed at the printout. "You've put all of us under the microscope. If you think I'm going down with you, think again." As the night wore on, Marcus finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. Sitting alone in his White House office, he stared out at the illuminated cityscape, the Capitol building standing tall in the distance. He thought about his mother, who had raised him to believe in justice and equality, despite growing up in a world that often denied it. He thought about his younger brother, who had once been stopped by police for riding his bike in the wrong neighborhood. And he thought about every name that had become a hashtag, every life cut short by unchecked power. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed a number. When the president answered, Marcus didn't hesitate. "Sir, I'm ready to fight this," he said firmly, "not just for me, but for everyone who doesn't have the privilege I do. We need to push harder for reform." The president's voice was steady. "And we will, Marcus, starting with those officers. They won't get away with this." Marcus hung up, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about his survival. It was about turning his pain into progress, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what he did. As he stared out into the night, a spark of determination lit his eyes. The fight was just beginning. The next morning, Marcus woke early, his body still sore from the assault, but his mind sharpened with purpose. He stood before his bathroom mirror, inspecting the bruises that marred his cheek and arms. The pain was a reminder, not of his vulnerability, but of the fight he now had to lead. He had been at the heart of policy-making, drafting proposals and speeches, but now the issue was personal. After dressing in a crisp suit and straightening his tie, Marcus headed to the West Wing. Outside, the atmosphere was tense. Staffers moved with urgency, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. The story had exploded overnight. News channels replayed the viral footage on a loop, and headlines screamed for justice. In the Oval Office, the president sat with his closest advisors, their expressions somber. When Marcus entered, all eyes turned to him. The president rose from his chair, crossing the room to shake Marcus's hand firmly. "Marcus, you've been through hell," the president said, his voice tinged with anger. "But we're going to make this right." Marcus took a seat, nodding. "Thank you, sir. But this isn't just about making it right for me. We need to address the bigger issue. This kind of abuse of power is systemic." The chief of staff chimed in. "Public pressure is mounting. Civil rights leaders are calling for those officers to be fired and prosecuted. We need to respond decisively." The president leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I want you to be part of the press conference, Marcus. You're not just a victim in this. You're a leader. The country needs to hear from you." Marcus hesitated. The thought of standing before cameras and bearing his trauma to the world made his stomach churn. But he knew this wasn't about his comfort. It was about justice. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "But we can't stop there. We need to announce the task force we've been planning for months, the one on police reform. The president smiled faintly. You read my mind. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Tyler and Grayson were spiraling. The video had stripped away any hope of plausible deniability. Tyler paced the room, his face flushed with frustration. This is a witch hunt, he snapped. They're crucifying us over one incident. Grayson sat slumped in a chair, his face pale. It's not just one incident, Tyler. They're digging into our records. If they find anything— Shut up, Tyler barked. We just need to stick to our story. Their captain entered, her expression cold. Your story won't save you now. Internal Affairs is coming in, and I've got the mayor breathing down my neck. You're both suspended, effective immediately. Tyler's face twisted in disbelief. You're throwing us under the bus? No, the captain replied, her tone icy. You threw yourselves under the bus when you decided to beat up a presidential aide. You're on your own. That afternoon, the press conference was held in the White House Rose Garden. The air was electric, a mix of outrage and anticipation. Dozens of reporters crowded in, their cameras poised. Protesters gathered outside the gates, chanting slogans for justice. Marcus stood behind the podium, flanked by the president and key advisors. He took a deep breath, steadying himself as the president introduced him. Marcus Johnson is not just a member of my team, he's a man of integrity, compassion, and dedication to justice, the president said. What happened to him is unacceptable, and it's a stark reminder of the work we still need to do. The president stepped aside, and Marcus approached the microphone. The crowd fell silent, every lens trained on him. I never thought I would be standing here like this, Marcus began, his voice calm but powerful, not as an advisor to the president, but as a victim of the very injustice I've spent my career trying to combat. He paused, letting his words sink in. What happened to me isn't unique. It's a reality for countless black men and women across this country who don't have the privilege of cameras or witnesses to hold their abusers accountable. But this time, the system won't protect those officers. This time, we demand justice. The audience erupted in applause, but Marcus wasn't finished. This isn't just about two bad cops. It's about a system that allows people like them to thrive while others suffer. That's why I'm proud to stand with the president today to announce the formation of a national task force on police reform. This is just the beginning. As the press conference concluded, Marcus returned to his office, his phone buzzing with messages of support. Civil rights organizations, fellow aides, and even strangers were reaching out to express their solidarity. But not all the messages were positive. Threats began pouring in. Anonymous emails and social media posts accusing him of destroying good cops and pushing an anti-police agenda. Marcus knew the backlash was inevitable, but it didn't lessen the sting. Agent Brooks appeared at his door, his expression serious. You're going to need protection, he said. There's a lot of anger out there. Marcus nodded. I expected as much. Let them be angry. If they think threats will scare me off, they don't know me. That evening, Tyler and Grayson were taken into custody. The footage, paired with witness statements and their fabricated reports, left no room for doubt. They were charged with assault, filing false reports, and abuse of authority. As they were escorted into the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, their cameras capturing every moment. Tyler snarled at the press, but Grayson kept his head down, visibly shaken. Inside the courtroom, Marcus watched from the gallery as the charges were read. For the first time since the incident, he felt a sense of vindication. But it was bittersweet. This was only a small step in a much larger fight. Later that night, Marcus returned home, finally allowing himself a moment of quiet. He sat on his couch, staring at the city lights through his window. He thought of the faces in the crowd during the press conference, the hope, the anger, the determination. This wasn't just about him. It was about the millions of people who deserved better from a system that had failed them for too long. As he closed his eyes, Marcus knew one thing for certain. This fight was far from over, but he was ready to see it through, no matter the cost. Marcus awoke to a flood of messages. His phone buzzed incessantly, its screen lighting up with notifications from colleagues, activists, and even strangers. The press conference had struck a chord with the nation. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #EndPoliceBrutality. Civil rights leaders hailed Marcus's courage, while law enforcement unions and conservative commentators denounced him as a troublemaker. He scrolled through the barrage of messages, his heart heavy. The support was overwhelming, but the vitriol cut deep. Threats, slurs, and accusations filled his inbox. One message read, "You're ruining the reputation of good officers." Another warned, "You'll regret this." Marcus set the phone down, taking a deep breath. He had expected backlash, but the sheer volume was staggering. It wasn't just about him anymore. He was now a symbol of a larger fight, one that made people uncomfortable, even angry. Later that morning, Marcus met with the newly formed task force on police reform. The room was filled with a diverse group of experts, civil rights attorneys, community organizers, police chiefs from progressive departments, and legal scholars. The president opened the meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen, the events of the past 48 hours underscore the urgency of our mission. Marcus Johnson will be taking the lead on this task force, using his experience and insight to guide our efforts." Marcus stood, his confidence steady despite the weight of the moment. "Thank you, Mr. President. This isn't just about policy. It's about rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. That starts with accountability and transparency." The group nodded in agreement, but one police chief, an older man with a stern expression, raised his hand. "Mr. Johnson, with all due respect, how do you plan to gain the trust of officers on the ground? Many of them see these reforms as an attack on their ability to do their jobs." Marcus met his gaze. "This isn't about attacking officers, it's about protecting citizens. Good officers should welcome accountability because it upholds the integrity of their profession. Those who resist have something to hide." The room fell silent. The chief nodded reluctantly, and Marcus continued. "We'll start by reviewing cases like mine, where excessive force and fabricated reports were used to cover up abuse. We'll ensure that every incident is thoroughly investigated and that those responsible face consequences." Across town, Tyler and Grayson sat in a holding cell, their uniforms replaced by orange jumpsuits. Tyler paced angrily, his fists clenched. "This is a damn circus," he muttered. "We're scapegoats for their political agenda." Grayson sat on the bench, his face pale and drawn. "You don't get it, do you? We're done. That footage, we can't explain it away." Tyler sneered. "So what? You're just gonna roll over and let them ruin us?" "I'm saying we messed up," Grayson shot back, his voice rising. "Maybe it's time to take responsibility." Before Tyler could respond, the door opened and their lawyer entered, his expression grim. "We've got a problem," he said. "The prosecution has witnesses, forensic video analysis, and your falsified reports. Pleading not guilty isn't an option." Tyler glared at him. "Then what do we do?" "Cooperate," the lawyer replied. "It's your only chance to reduce the sentence. As Marcus left the task force meeting that afternoon, Agent Brooks was waiting for him. His expression was serious, his body language tense. "Marcus, we need to talk," Brooks said, pulling him aside. "What's going on?" Marcus asked. "We've received credible threats against you," Brooks said. "Some of them are tied to extremist groups angry about your role in the task force." Marcus's stomach tightened. "What kind of threats?" Brooks hesitated. "Enough to warrant increased security. From now on, you'll have an armed detail with you at all times." Marcus sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "This is what happens when you challenge the system," he said quietly. "People lash out." Brooks placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll keep you safe. But you need to stay vigilant." That evening, a peaceful rally was held outside the White House gates. Thousands gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans demanding justice and reform. Marcus watched from a window, his heart swelling with emotion. He saw families, activists, and even off-duty officers who had come to show their support. Among the crowd, a young girl held a sign that read, "My brother deserves to live without fear." Her words struck Marcus deeply, reminding him of his own younger brother and the countless lives affected by systemic racism. He stepped away from the window, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about policy or press conferences. It was about the people in that crowd and the generations to come. The next day, Marcus received troubling news. The police union had filed a lawsuit against the administration, claiming the task force's reforms violated officers' rights. Conservative media seized the opportunity, painting Marcus as a radical intent on dismantling law enforcement. The attacks were relentless. Marcus's face appeared on every major network, his name dragged through debates and op-eds. Commentators called him anti-cop, divisive, and even unpatriotic. In a private meeting with the president, Marcus vented his frustrations. "They're twisting the narrative, sir. This isn't about hating police, it's about accountability." The president nodded. "I know, Marcus, but change always comes with resistance. You've got to stay focused. Let the results speak for themselves." That evening, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. It was from a high-ranking police chief in another state, one known for progressive reforms. "I watched your press conference," the chief said. "I wanted to let you know that not all of us are against what you're doing. There are plenty of us who believe in accountability and transparency." Marcus was taken aback. "I appreciate that. It feels like the whole world's against me right now." "You're not alone," the chief replied, "and if you ever need someone to stand with you, I'm just a call away." As the night deepened, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, his body weary but his mind alive with thoughts. The threats, the backlash, the lawsuit, all of it weighed heavily on him. But the rally, the young girl's sign, and the phone call from the progressive police chief reminded him why he couldn't give up. He opened his laptop and began drafting a new plan for the task force, one that would address the police union's concerns while staying true to the mission. He worked late into the night, his fingers flying across the keyboard. This fight wasn't just his anymore. It was a movement, and Marcus was determined to see it through, no matter how long it took. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the White House earlier than usual, fueled by little sleep but a fierce determination. The new draft of the task force's plan rested in his briefcase, carefully revised to balance accountability with practical reforms. He knew the backlash wasn't going to fade, but this plan would push forward regardless. As he walked through the halls of the West Wing, a few staff members greeted him with encouraging nods, their support palpable. Marcus appreciated the gestures, but his focus was razor-sharp. Today was critical. In the Situation Room, the president sat at the head of the table, flanked by key advisors, legal experts, and policy consultants. Marcus entered, his step steady despite the weight of the moment. He placed the revised plan on the table and addressed the room. "This plan includes everything we discussed in the task force," Marcus began. "It maintains the core of our reforms: enhanced accountability measures, independent oversight, and better training programs, but I've adjusted some provisions to address the police union's concerns." He flipped through the pages, detailing changes like increased funding for officer wellness programs and streamlined grievance procedures for unjust complaints. "This isn't about compromising our principles," Marcus continued. "It's about showing that reform doesn't mean dismantling. It means rebuilding trust on both sides." The room was silent as the president scanned the document. Finally, he nodded. "This is good work, Marcus. It shows we're listening without backing down." The chief of staff chimed in. "But will it be enough to win public opinion? The opposition is louder than ever." "It won't silence everyone," Marcus admitted, "but it gives us the moral high ground. If we stand firm and communicate our vision clearly, we can shift the narrative." The president smiled faintly. "Then let's get to work." Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the National Police Union, tensions were high. Union President Frank Reynolds, a grizzled man with decades in law enforcement, reviewed the administration's revised plan with his team. His brow furrowed as he read through the proposals. "They've softened some of the edges," one advisor noted, "but the core reforms are still there. Independent oversight, mandatory body cams, use of force reviews." Reynolds grunted. "They think they can throw us a bone and we'll roll over. We need to double down." Another advisor hesitated. "The public's already turning against us, Frank. The footage of those officers beating Johnson. It's a PR nightmare. Maybe it's time to meet them halfway." Reynolds slammed the table. "No. If we give an inch, they'll take a mile. Call the press. We're holding a conference this afternoon." That afternoon, two simultaneous press conferences unfolded. At the White House, Marcus stood alongside the president and other task force members, presenting the revised plan to the public. Marcus spoke with clarity and conviction, outlining the reforms and addressing concerns head-on. "These changes aren't anti-police," he said. "They're pro-justice. They're about ensuring that every officer operates with integrity and that every citizen is treated with dignity. We owe that to the communities we serve." The response was mixed. Supporters praised the administration's balanced approach, while critics called it too little, too late. But the seeds of change were planted. Across town, Reynolds held his own press conference. Flanked by union representatives, he painted a stark picture of the reforms. "This administration is demonizing our officers," Reynolds declared. "They're asking us to operate with one hand tied behind our backs. These reforms will make it harder for officers to do their jobs and keep communities safe." The media latched onto his words, framing the debate as a clash between public safety and reform. Marcus watched the coverage later that evening, his jaw tightening as Reynolds's rhetoric gained traction. As the day wore on, Marcus received a call from Agent Brooks. The tone of his voice made Marcus's stomach drop. "There's been a breach," Brooks said. "Someone leaked your home address online. We've already increased security, but you should be prepared for anything." Marcus felt a chill run through him. He had anticipated threats, but not this level of escalation. His phone buzzed with a text from his younger brother, Jason. "You okay? Saw your address online. Want me to come over?" Marcus replied quickly. I'm fine. Stay safe. Don't come here." He sat on his couch, staring at the screen. The threats weren't just targeting him. They were putting his family at risk. He clenched his fists, the pressure mounting. But instead of despair, he felt a surge of resolve. The next day, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his office. It was Chief Laura Delgado, a police chief known for implementing progressive reforms in her city. "I saw the union's press conference," she said, her tone steady, "and I'm tired of their fear-mongering. Not all of us agree with Reynolds. Some of us believe in what you're doing." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're taking a big risk coming here." Delgado smiled faintly. "So are you. If we don't take risks, nothing will change." The two spoke for hours, strategizing ways to bring more progressive voices from law enforcement into the conversation. Delgado promised to rally like-minded police chiefs to publicly support the reforms. As the week went on, public sentiment began to shift. Stories emerged of officers like Delgado who supported the reforms, countering Reynolds's narrative. Community leaders organized town halls to discuss the changes, and Marcus made appearances to address citizens directly. At one such event, a young man stood up, his voice trembling. "Mr. Johnson, my brother was killed by police 2 years ago. I just want to say thank you for fighting for people like him." Marcus's throat tightened. He stepped off the stage and approached the man, shaking his hand. "I'm sorry for your loss," Marcus said, "and I promise I won't stop fighting." The room erupted in applause, the energy palpable. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. The fight was far from over, but for the first time it felt winnable. That evening, Marcus returned home to find a stack of letters waiting for him. Most were supportive, but one stood out, a handwritten note with no signature. It read, "Change is dangerous. Be careful, Mr. Johnson." Marcus folded the note and placed it in a drawer. He looked out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The threats didn't scare him anymore. They only fueled his resolve. This wasn't just about reforming the police. It was about proving that justice, when pursued relentlessly, could overcome even the most entrenched opposition. Marcus knew the road ahead would be long and perilous, but he was ready to walk it, every step of the way. The days turned into weeks, and the storm surrounding the reforms continued to rage. Marcus had become a household name, both celebrated and vilified. The revised plan gained traction in Congress, with several key lawmakers expressing tentative support. The task force's work was far from over, but Marcus knew they were making progress. Still, the pressure was relentless. Marcus worked long hours, juggling policy discussions, public appearances, and meetings with community leaders. He barely had time to eat, let alone sleep. Despite the exhaustion, he pressed on, driven by the faces of those who depended on him, the victims, the families, and the countless others who saw him as a symbol of hope. One afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected call from Senator Eleanor Hayes, a moderate with significant sway in Congress. "Marcus," she said, her tone measured, "I've been reviewing your plan, and I believe there's room for bipartisan support, but we'll need to make a few adjustments to get it through." Marcus leaned back in his chair, gripping the phone tightly. "What kind of adjustments, Senator?" "Nothing that compromises the core reforms," Hayes assured him. "But if we emphasize funding for community policing and officer wellness programs, it'll be easier to win over some of the undecided votes." Marcus hesitated. He knew any compromise risked alienating activists who demanded sweeping change, but he also understood the importance of pragmatism. "I'll discuss it with the task force," he said finally. "Thank you for reaching out." That evening, Marcus convened the task force for an emergency meeting. The room buzzed with tension as he relayed Senator Hayes's proposal. "This could be the breakthrough we need," Marcus said, "but it's a delicate balance. We can't water down the reforms so much that they lose their impact." One member, a prominent civil rights attorney, frowned. "I understand the need for compromise, but we have to be careful. This is our chance to make real change, not just symbolic gestures." Chief Delgado spoke up. "As someone in law enforcement, I can tell you that wellness programs and community policing are crucial. They'll help rebuild trust between officers and the public." After hours of debate, the task force reached a consensus. They would incorporate Senator Hayes's suggestions without compromising the plan's accountability measures. It was a gamble, but one Marcus was willing to take. The revised plan was introduced to Congress the following week. The debate was fierce, with opponents decrying it as anti-police and supporters championing it as a long-overdue step toward justice. Marcus watched the proceedings from a gallery seat, his hands clenched tightly. When the final vote was tallied, the plan passed by a narrow margin. The chamber erupted in applause from supporters while detractors stormed out in frustration. Marcus exhaled deeply, a wave of relief washing over him. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. A few days later, Tyler and Grayson faced sentencing for their crimes. The courtroom was packed, with media and spectators eager to see justice served. Marcus attended, sitting quietly in the back. The judge's voice was firm as he delivered the verdict. "Officer Tyler and Officer Grayson, your actions on the night in question were a gross abuse of power and a betrayal of the public trust. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 3. The officers' faces were pale, their bravado gone. As they were led away in handcuffs, Marcus felt a sense of closure. Not vengeance, but accountability. In the months that followed, the reforms began to take effect. Police departments nationwide adopted new training protocols, independent oversight committees were established, and body cameras became mandatory. The road to implementation was rocky, with resistance in some areas, but the momentum was undeniable. One evening, Marcus returned home after a particularly grueling day. His apartment was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of his work life. He poured himself a glass of water and sat by the window, gazing at the city skyline. His phone buzzed with a message from his brother, Jason. "Proud of you, bro. Keep going." Marcus smiled faintly. He thought about how far he'd come, from that terrifying night on the street to standing at the forefront of a national movement. The fight wasn't over. It might never truly be over, but he was ready to keep pushing. For the first time in months, Marcus allowed himself to relax, if only for a moment. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply as the city lights twinkled outside. Justice was a long and arduous journey, but he was walking it step by step with no intention of turning back. Years later, Marcus stood on a stage at a university, delivering a keynote address. The audience was packed with young activists, law students, and community leaders inspired by his work. "Change isn't easy," he said, his voice steady and resonant. "It's messy, it's painful, and it's slow, but every step forward matters. Every voice raised in the name of justice makes a difference." As the crowd erupted in applause, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey that began with injustice had transformed into a legacy of hope and progress. And though the work was never done, he knew he had made an impact. A reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, was always worth fighting for.